Awesome. So we do think we have a good crowd that's already joined. So I think it's a perfect time for us to join the session. Again, thanks for everybody who's joining us. Really good, engaging questions on the last session. And I really, again, please keep them coming, because the idea is not so much that we're just presenting at you, it's really to build the community and to have everybody talking and engaging. So I'm really excited about this session. So thank you so much, Francisco, for joining us today. Where we're going to be talking about using a ransomware assessment to identify gaps and risks. As we know, FSIs are more susceptible, good English by me today, susceptible to ransomware attacks, and it has a really greater attack surface. So with that, Francisco, who is our sales engineering manager, many of you may have even interacted with him early on in your safe breach journey. He's going to kind of run through some different scenarios with an assessment. So I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to let Francisco chat, but don't forget, questions in the chat panel, or if you want to hop on and ask your questions towards the end, you're more than welcome to as well. And we're here. So with that, Francisco, we'll get going.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. So yeah, my name is Francisco Nájera, and I manage sales engineering for Safe Breach across the Americas. We're going to be talking about ransomware and ransomware assessments, as we saw in the keynote presentation from Tomer. It is definitely a threat vector that is being used successfully against financial organizations. And it's not just really limited to financial services, of course, right? We've seen ransomware attacks against critical infrastructure and healthcare to education, governments, all organizations can be a target. Many ransomware attacks are a crime of opportunity, with a lot of organizations with weak security defenses having fallen first. But any organization that has unprotected public-facing systems and digital transformation certainly contributes to a lot of that, can be a target. And so, of course, some of those victims are actively being targeted, and depending on attacker profiles, the attacks can happen very quickly. For example, cybercrime gangs, they generally want to get paid, in very little time, whereas nation states will take their time and start to look more through the environment for a larger payout. But in all cases, the best defense is good offense. And so this is where Safe Breach comes in. And some of you may or may not be familiar with Safe Breach as a platform, but I'll spend a couple of minutes just talking about how we help in general. So we make offensive security simple and scalable. Safe Breach is focused on enabling organizations to run thousands of attacks at a click of a button. So with a push of a button, you can quickly identify where you have gaps in security defenses and your processes as well. The platform empowers teams of defenders as well as red teamers and purple teamers to continuously validate and optimize the efficacy of controls either on-prem or in the cloud, to test security posture against emerging threats, known threats, to discover gaps before the adversaries are able to take advantage of them, to proactively identify where attacks are going to be successful before being in the middle of a breach. I'll talk about the ransomware assessment and what we're going to be testing. So as Tomer mentioned during the session, there's been a huge spike of ransomware attacks against the financial industry, and 3 out of 4 of those financial services leaders having witnessed an attack. I think it's really important to focus on ransomware resiliency and understanding where you're able to, again, defend, prevent, detect, log the activity that's going to lead to that final execution of ransomware. And so we've developed a scenario that allows you to run this assessment in under 30 minutes. It's a customized scenario. It leverages some of today's top ransomware families. This includes Clop, Cuba ransomware, Lockbit, Black Bastard, etc. Of course, you can add to these if you're more interested in a different family, and we'll show you how to go ahead and customize some of this. But the assessment provides a quick view of where you're able to defend against some of these widely used techniques during a ransomware attack. So some of the behaviors we'll be testing include credential access, persistence, defense evasion, discovery. All of these are, going to lead to lateral movement, and stopping key services like volume shadow copies is going to lead or be the precursor to the actual ransomware execution. We'll then use a real encryption logic used by the ransomware families that we're implementing here, where we'll be targeting, real file types within the downloads folder of a impersonated user account. We'll look for actual file types based on the family, flip the extensions over, and of course do all the cleanup. And the whole goal here is that we're going to help whatever security controls you might have at the endpoint, whether that's EDR or EPP, file integrity monitoring, to be able to identify the actions as they're taking place. We'll cap this off by using an exfiltration attack to simulate exfiltrating the data out of the environment once it's been once the systems have been encrypted. So I'm going to go ahead and flip on over to the console, and let me make sure I have that up, and we'll show you how this all gets staged. So just before I kick off the assessment, I've gone ahead and just disabled the defender on one of the endpoints. I created a custom attack to do that, simple PowerShell command. And this will give us some good A/B scenarios. I'm going to run the assessment across 2 different systems and the external attacker. So there'll be 3 simulators staged as part of the attack. And let me show you how that gets configured. So under safe breach scenarios, I'll go in my scenario. I've got a ransomware assessment ready to go. These assessments, these scenarios can easily be imported, exported. So if you want to run some of these yourself, we're more than happy to provide the assessment for you. If you're a customer of Safe Breach, of course, reach out to your customer success team for this. So as I mentioned, we're going to focus on initial foothold, different techniques that are going to be leveraged, and we'll use some email phishing attacks, including the different payloads that are going to be transferred as part of the CLOP ransomware attack. We'll have some basic write to disk and transfers as well on the initial foothold. We'll have some C2 activity, malware transfers across the network, some discovery techniques as well, propagating across the network to different simulators. So I'll show you where we're staging the simulators as well across the different attacks. We could do this both at the scenario level as well as the individual step in each step of the kill chain here. And ransomware execution, so mentioned that we'll be effectively implementing the encryption logic, the full attack logic of the ransomware families that were selected here, as well as the exfiltration attacks that are going to be leveraged to move data out of the environment. So how do we prep the scenario? I started just by quickly at the scenario level selecting simulators that I want to participate in that attack. And in this case, I've selected my external attacker, my 2 victim machines here. I've got a Windows 10 box as well as a 2016 Active Directory domain controller. I'll click next and check out. There are a few constraints. All good. I'll get check marks across the board. Now I can edit each step individually. At this point, I've actually, just allowed the platform to run in chaos mode across all those 3 systems. But I can actually override each individual step if I wanted to. So for example, on the exfiltration step, I may just want to have the data be exfiltrated directly from the domain controller as opposed to the Windows box. So depending on the scenario, you may want to adjust it. But at this point, we're ready to go. And I can go ahead and run the attack. So I'll confirm again, my real-time protection is turned off on my Win 10 box. It's on my Windows domain controller. I'll go ahead and run the assessment. So as I mentioned, this is going to be pretty quick. It's only 297 simulations, but it'll give you a good idea of what steps in that attack chain you'll be able to defend against. And of course, we'll be able to visualize all of those results in a dedicated dashboard. So the scenarios and the dashboards, as you may or may not be aware of, can easily be imported using a JSON file. So let me flip on back to the presentation here. And while that assessment is running, we'll go through a couple of more points. And basically, talk a bit about the characteristics of a ransomware attack and the techniques that are being used. And apologize. Trying to find my window. Too many windows. Great. Yeah, so once the attacks, did I stop sharing accidentally? I think I did. Okay. So yeah, as mentioned earlier, the ransomware gangs are opportunistic, but on occasion they can target certain organizations, and especially if they're able to buy compromised credentials. Once attackers are able to make it into the network, they're going to try to blend in. So there will be a lot of LOLBAS, a lot of defense evasion that's going to be used, blending in as legitimate users using those compromised credentials. They may leverage whitelisted admin utilities that are going to be hard to block. Common tools can be dual purposed, and of course, there's a fine line between a rat and an admin tool, as those admin tools can easily be abused by the attacker. So it's really important to be able to log this activity. While you may not be able to prevent it, but understand when it is being used in order to quickly identify malicious activity in the environment and be able to contain or hopefully evict the threat actor. This is a typical ransomware attack. As I mentioned, there are different techniques in the assessment that are being exercised as part of the simulations. A typical ransomware attack might use upwards of 30 techniques, so that might include discovery commands, as mentioned earlier, using legitimate admin tools or batch scripts, Cobalt Strike beacons for command and control, payload staging, lateral movement, LSAS dump for credential harvesting, bypassing controls, tampering with controls, adding exceptions to controls. All of those are techniques that may be used as part of a ransomware attack. Of course, stopping key services, deleting volume shadow copies, etc. That's all activity that should be monitored, that should be logged, that should contribute to correlation logic, or whatever AI mechanisms may be available in the environment to try to single out this activity as it's taking place. SafeBreach allows you to simulate all of these techniques, as you see in the assessment, in order to generate that telemetry. So validate that custom detections are firing as you'd expect them to. And this, of course, is very time consuming if you're doing it manually, but we're making it all very simple. Again, through a few clicks of a button, you're able to generate the telemetry that's needed in order to again, validate that you're going to be able to detect and defend, during a ransomware attack. So I'm going to flip on back to the console and see if I can do this without losing some of my screens. And we can see this is already halfway done. And for the interest of time, I've actually ran some of these previously, so I can click on it here. We can go and dive into some of the results. You'll see, as we talked about earlier, a lot of like common protocols that are going to be leveraged, moving laterally via SMB, doing SMB discovery or LDAP discovery is going to be a technique that may be tricky to defend against, but should be easy to identify. I'll click on the results call to action button. I'll come in pre-filtered into the individual results of the attacks, and we can start to dive in and understand, where things are being stopped and where some of these attacks are successful. And so we can see that, if I click on dismissed result, it's covert exfiltration using HTTP post. We're able to go outbound into clear, report 8080. And SafeReach is automating all of the different parameter combinations, browser user agents that are going to be leveraged to try to get around some narrow policies that may be in place. At times policies get deployed and they're maybe over-engineered. So, as an example, you might have unencrypted traffic that can flow through port 443 because you've got a policy that's too explicit and only expecting SSL decryption to be taking place over that port. So a lot of that can easily be identified by SafeBreach as part of the out-of-the-box chaos mode logic. So we can see here as we dive in, the attacker is staging the receiving endpoint, and the victim is sending over HTTP post the data. Again, we're binding over on port 8080 and listening for that victim, ultimately getting the payload as we expected. There's a flip view for MITRE attacks. So as we saw earlier, there are a lot of techniques that are being exercised as part of the ransomware assessment, and you can see those listed here. So you could always flip on over to the MITRE attack view, begin to dive into the individual techniques, because all the attacks in the attack library are mapped to MITRE. You'll always have this view. I'm going to flip on over to the dashboards, and then we'll look at the ransomware dedicated dashboard that we have for this data set. I've selected that assessment that I ran previously. And again, just some high-level metrics. All of this is being supported by the individual results. So you could always click in and get to that low-level detail that you might need. If we have integrations, I don't in this environment, with your security stack, you'll be able to pull that information in as well under security events tag. But everything that we just saw, that exfil over HTTP post, is all here and used as supporting evidence to build these high-level visualizations. There's a description of the attack flow, so the initial foothold, C2 activity, malware transfer, ransomware execution, etc. Some of the behavioral simulations, accounts, command and control that's being performed, the targets that we're focused on, the results around infiltration. We can filter these by anything right here. We're filtering by infiltration protocol, top infiltration simulations. So again, all the techniques that are going to be leveraged to gain that initial foothold, the behavioral techniques that are going to be used to begin to discover systems in the environment and move laterally, the low-level evidence that you might need as a defender to understand, okay, how did this actually happen? You can get down to the simulation logs, look at the active sessions that we were able to identify on that system, and then the visual evidence of us being able to move laterally onto that box as well. So all of that is available to you as part of the automated attack. Again, the whole goal of SafeBreach is to be able to simplify these type of tests so you can begin to identify and report on where you may have gaps. So as far as encryption logic at the endpoint, I mentioned earlier, you can see data encrypted for impact. Let's see if I click on this here and we go to simulations. Same level of detail, obviously a different attack. So you'll see once we get on that box in demo 5 under that users directory, we're able to then identify different files based on the CLOP ransomware family. We're going to go after specific file types and encrypt those. And then once we've successfully encrypted the files, then we're going to revert everything back. Okay. So that is the ransomware dashboard. Again, very useful to understand where you may have gaps, easy to drill into to get to the low-level evidence. I'm going to flip on back to the presentation, just go through a few more talking points, and then we'll open it up for questions. So I think it's really important to understand that the line between criminal gangs and nation states is getting blurry, and the difference really just boils down to motivation and objectives. So espionage versus extortion, quick payout versus sitting in and bringing in a whale. Of course, not everything can be prevented, but a lot of these things can be defended against. And as you saw, the techniques that we help exercise in your environment can help to validate that you have some level of resiliency in place should you be hit by one of these ransomware crews. It's also important to understand that the complexity of an attack continues to drop, as well as the cost. So anything that may seem sophisticated today is probably going to be part of a ransomware as a service capability tomorrow. So again, it's really important to understand that these techniques are being repurposed, and SafeReach's focus to provide you with the most up-to-date content to be able to keep up with these attacks, so that you can understand how you're able to detect and defend against them. Because the ransomware gangs are able to purchase maybe initial access at a very cheap cost, maybe as little as $200 for a set of credentials, or get repo keys. The number of initial infection vectors continues to grow. And so it's really important to be able to, again, understand the subsequent steps in the ransomware kill chain that are going to need to be executed in order to pull off the end goal and objectives for the attackers. So if you break the kill chain early, obviously, that's going to make things a lot easier. But that's not always possible, again, because of the growing sprawl of available systems and growing attack surface. But understanding, where your critical data is, knowing that you have resilient and immutable backups to be able to restore in case you do get hit by one of these ransomware attacks is also as important as being able to prevent them at the front door. So, with that, I'm going to just pause here for questions and see if anyone's got anything that they might want to have answered specifically around this or otherwise.
So we did have a couple in the chat, but they were from early in the discussion. So I think you may have gotten to them, because I see it seems like someone says yes. So you must have covered that after the initial questions. So it may be easier, Francisco, for you just to kind of look at them if you click session and chat. And then we can see there. In the meantime, if there are any additional any additional questions, please, folks, put them in the chat, or you can come on and ask them live too. So I don't know if you got this one about the encryption phase, creating file.
Yeah. So there's a couple of attacks in a SafeReach platform. One will target the actual files of an impersonated user folder. So we're going after the downloads folder primarily. and we're going to be encrypting, depending on the file types that the ransomware family is going after, we're going to be encrypting those files. There is another attack in the SafeBreach platform that targets files and folders that we provide as part of that simulation as well. So it's focused on the behavior aspect, but some security controls may not necessarily be monitoring for that because those files and folders are being provided by us. So you've got a couple of options in how you want to run the scenarios. As I mentioned earlier, these can easily be adjusted to account for that.
Well,
the location of the file can be updated. Yeah, absolutely. You can go ahead and duplicate, as I don't know if you guys were in OHAT session earlier with KJ, but you can absolutely duplicate an attack and then update the file path. And so I know some security controls may by default ignore some locations in a user disk folder. You can go ahead and override those and make those explicit to where you might have a control pointing to.
Awesome. Well, if there are no other questions, we'll thank everyone. And we're also going to take, so thank you for the suggestion. And we did try to put breaks inside the times to keep the sessions a little shorter, but we're running over. So we're going to start actually the next session at 12:35. So or 9:35, depending what time zone we're in between. So we'll jump onto that next session shortly. Thank you so much, Francisco, for joining us. This was really great and informative. So thanks a bunch. And we'll see everybody in the next session.